Hello and welcome to On Second Thought with Mike and Luke, a culture-building conversation about the underlying connections and root causes which shape our lives in a decadent and self-destructive age. Today we're going to talk about Trump as a dictator, we're going to talk about Civil War in the movies, and we'll see if we can get to the Bible and maybe a little bit about marriage. How you doing, Mike?
I'm doing okay. Busy.
Good. Busy, yeah.
Yeah.
Christmas season.
Yep.
All right, so I have a question. Last time we had a long episode. We debated all over the place and about this statue, the satanic statue in Iowa.
Yeah.
It has since been torn down. Have you heard about that?
Gideon, middle of the night.
Yep, Jared Bale, I think his name was. A guy drove, I think, from Oklahoma and tore it down.
I did not hear about this.
And then turned himself in and said, I did it. And so they charged him with some low-level misdemeanor and released him. And there was a fundraiser put out for his legal fees that raised $70,000 immediately.
He did more damage than the January 6th Stop
An
the Steal
insurrection.
people.
Yeah. But the debate has been raging all week in a lot of circles that I follow of, is this the American way? Like, does the Constitution protect it? What are your any
Debating,
thoughts since we
what's the
debated
debate
it?
on? The tearing down or the original installation?
Well, the tearing down is seen as a good thing. You're tearing down an evil thing, and that it shouldn't even be legal. It shouldn't be allowed, and that the founders would not have thought. They wrote a constitution that says you can put up satanic displays in the Capitol building.
Yeah. Well, was it in the Capitol, state Capitol?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh. Yeah. Well, so that wasn't your question last time, that it was in a state capitol. It was, should people be free to worship Satan?
Well, it went to there. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
that was your first question. Do they have the freedom to worship Satan?
Okay.
And that was the starting point. I think it's a different answer in terms of the Capitol.
Yeah.
But I also have to agree personally that setting up Christian images, I don't think is legitimate in a Capitol also.
Oh, okay.
I don't think any images are. I think there is a theistic generality in our Constitution that gives individuals liberty, and I don't think the state is a promoter of religion in general, other than our moral code is structured in theism.
So you're a believer in the government can stay neutral.
Well,
when it comes to religious and moral questions.
I would defend that to some respects, but I would make caveats for it, because there is no such thing as neutrality in an ultimate way.
Well, the hard part is the government's job is to enforce morality, and religion is the source of it. So it feels like it's an inseparable. Like, I can see the authority structures being separated, church and government, but they're always going to influence each other, and they're always going to try to.
So this is where we start differing so quickly. I don't think it is their job to enforce morality. I think their job is a sword that assumes that there can be immoral things that a people choose, and their institution is to support that. I don't think that would be right.
Right.
But that's what their job is, the sword.
Mm-hmm. But it's to enforce right and wrong as the government mandates.
Yes, but that's not the same as right and wrong as a Christian thinks of right and wrong.
Well, no, I'm not saying. I'm saying they enforce a morality of whatever.
A morality.
Correct.
Well, you said morality at first, and when I hear that as the Christian version.
Well, I want our government to enforce a Christian version of morality. Currently, they enforce a godless or even antichrist version, as we see in a lot of venues.
They are doing what they're made to do. Mm-hmm. It's just for an end that is anti-God.
Right, which is why I think it was John Adams who said that this government they've given us, it only works for a moral and religious people.
A democratic republic only works when the people itself have a moral base in themselves that is founded in God. But they're still doing their job, what they're set to do, even if it gets off course from the morality that is honoring to God.
Yeah. Well, because we get the government we deserve. I think that's the kind of final picture of it. I mean, even if you look at how when the people of God in the Bible turn from him, they become victims of oppression. They get taken over. They get taken into slavery, right, and dispersed around the world as a judgment on them. Yeah. They get the government they deserved.
Yeah. So what do you think about the tearing down then? Do you think he should face jail time or whatever misdemeanor
I mean,
he's being...
I'm rooting for the Iowa governor to pardon him, but...
But when you say pardon, you think it's legitimate that he be accused and prosecuted? Charged and prosecuted.
I think it is what the law currently says. If you break apart something that's put in public display, you know, you're going to get charged with a misdemeanor of...
I was thinking about this when remember in Canada, they had the blocking the bridges, the truckers. Mm-hmm. And I remember thinking about the justice of what they were doing and feeling the sentiment that when the police came for them and Trudeau sends the police and feeling the injustice of that.
Right.
And having to correct myself personally and saying, no, this is right. This is allowable for him to do. And if they go to jail, actually, that's correct. This is the price they pay because they are violating the law. So what they're choosing to do is
it's like Martin Luther King being put in the...
You violate a small law in order to object to a larger one.
Right.
And you have to be willing to pay the price of the small one, and you should not say, I want to get away with the small violation. The whole point is, yes, punish me for the small so that you might see what is wrong in the big.
Yeah.
And so when you say, I shouldn't be in jail, truckers, you're actually hurting your cause.
See, and I think Trudeau definitely took it too far in that.
I totally
freezing
agree.
the bank accounts of anyone who helped them.
I absolutely agree.
Yeah, and it was
But if you're going to do a civil disobedience, I think it's legitimate, but you have to say up front, I'm willing to pay the price. That's part of the message.
Right.
And so I think he should be charged, and I think whether he's pardoned or not, it's a separate question, but I think he absolutely should be charged. He broke the law. But he did it on purpose for a point.
Well, and the point is that it's an unjust law. That's what civil disobedience always does,
that's what his thought is. It doesn't matter if it is or isn't. It's what he thinks is, and he has a right to choose a lesser as long as he's willing to pay the price to get a message out.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
Interesting.
We're going to go far and wide today, hopefully, on our discussion. If you're enjoying it, we want to encourage you to click subscribe so you can get our next episode sent to you automatically. And also, if you're on iTunes or Spotify, send us a review.
So back on the other one.
Oh, you're not
what
done.
I hear you saying is, if you're saying, he should pay the crime there, even if you think what he does was undoing a greater unjust law, you still agree he should pay the violation of public property law.
No, I think it's unjust that he have to pay it. But I think it's right that he turn himself in.
So because the statute you think is unjust, so you think the people who crawled, so Martin Luther King, when they crawled on the sidewalks, or the people who picketed against abortion clinics and they passed, you don't think they should have been arrested in breaking those laws because the laws they're objecting to themselves are unjust in a God way.
Correct. So I think that the opposition that they encounter illustrates the need for the change in law, which is why it's good. Yeah. Right. Yeah. But I don't think it's right that, and this goes to that doctrine of the lesser magistrate. I think the local magistrates have an obligation to say, this law, even though it's on the books, isn't right. Therefore, I will work against it.
Yeah, they're working within the political structures, though, right? Or you're saying they should
maybe
violate
not.
Laws.
So if it's a policeman gets discretion on when he arrests or writes then you'd be within the bounds of the law. Yeah. But the law is going to become corrupted by a people who've become corrupted. Mm-hmm. And so there is a point where you have to say, no, I won't even follow the bounds of the law, which is what just war theory is all about.
So that's not where I am. I would probably be, you should object to the laws, and you can choose to violate other laws as a form of objection, but I think you should be prepared to pay the cost of them, even though it's hypocritical. You think
I think you should too. I'm just saying it's not right. You should be prepared to pay an unjust cost.
Well, I even think it's right,
objection to an unjust law.
I think if you violate a law in order to object to another law, but you violate, like trespassing on public property, let's say the going near the abortion clinics when they would walk, or Martin Luther King, when they would get on their hands and knees and crawl in places they weren't supposed to be, right? The law was unjust that they weren't supposed to be in a place, but they're also not supposed to trespass. Trespassing is not an unjust law, but the thing they were objecting to was unjust, So to be arrested for the smaller thing, I think is actually
Well,
right and good.
There's a legal argument to be had. One, you can't trespass on public property unless you're doing some secondary other crime, right? You can't just be kicked off public land because you disagree with. So for them to protest is a First Amendment protected activity. So
Right,
to
I
protest
agree.
on those
Yeah.
public areas
Yeah.
is also not a crime.
Yes, protesting is
The illustration.
Which is interesting about January 6th. Nobody, that just doesn't get brought up. That why do we not have a right to protest?
No, we
Basically,
do.
I know we do.
Yeah.
But that was never a part of the argumentation that this gathering and being here is a right to protest.
Well,
It was
but
just totally washed over.
yeah, but nobody's being like, I was present for January 6th and I'm not going to get charged, and no one has. Well, few people have.
A ton of people. And there's 1,200. I just read this morning, 1,200 new arrests within like the last week for people who are just there.
But only one
didn't go
person who's
in.
been charged that I've heard of, who actually, and his name was Brandon Straka, and he just got, wasn't acquitted. He was
saw that
actually
thing.
sued.
Yeah.
He was sued by police officers and just demonstrated they weren't even near him and he wasn't near them, so it
Yeah.
didn't make sense.
Yeah.
But all of the people who've been charged, and there was recently a journalist for the Blaze Media who was charged this week because he went in, right? Now, 60
Went
other
indoors.
journalists went in also because they're journalists and they're there to do that. And so he'll have a First Amendment protected case that I'm sure will be easy. But it was the entering the Capitol that was the crime. Now, the difficulty is
No, I think they said
people
it was
enter the Capitol all the time.
It was a disrupting a formal procedure was what they're using.
But it was
This is what-
disrupting the procedure that was taking place in the Capitol.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So this is what the Supreme Court just agreed to hear. It'll be March or April, something like that.
Yeah.
That this is a corporate law that came from the Enron situation, that you cannot disrupt a formal legal process that's taking place.
Yeah.
And so that's what the majority of the charges have been, and they're hearing an appeal on that,
Yeah,
which is
that'll
good.
be interesting.
Yeah.
Speaking of Trump and January 6th and all that, have you heard of the Democrat tagline that Trump is going to be a dictator?
Yeah.
Yeah, he made a joke the other day saying, "Oh yeah, I'll be a dictator, but only on one day."
I know.
When I don't know what it was he was going to decree, he said, and everybody laughed, and now this is the thing. And apparently I heard a survey, more than 50% of Americans believe he would act like a dictator if he got reelected.
So I've thought about this. The first thing I thought was, Trump, why do you say things that can so easily be turned against you?
Right.
And I was a little annoyed.
But that's also why he's a hero to so many people.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
So my second thought was, now wait a minute. It is not his fault, nor should, it's actually healthier. What he's doing is healthier because the real problem isn't that he says something, a slight inflammatory thing that can be used against him, because everyone knows if he wanted to be a dictator, he had ample opportunity with COVID and he didn't do it.
Yeah.
So that's not in his makeup. Number two, everybody knows what he means is that on day one, I'm gonna do these 8 things to right some wrongs, and they're just gonna happen. I'm gonna fiat them, right?
Yeah.
And they know what his intention was, and everybody agrees with him. And so it wasn't that either. But what I began to realize is think to myself, you know what it is? It's the media is so, I'm just gonna use the word evil. Its current manifestation
Yeah.
is so evil that it takes a comment like that, which is a normal way of discourse,
Right.
they turn it into something. And my thought was this: if you want to believe that's what he really meant because the media is telling you, go for it. You're the idiot.
But here's the trick, and this is where I hear a lot of pundits misunderstanding what's happening, and that is that no one on their side of the aisle, right? So the reasonable liberals that we've talked about, who who are convinced by these media,
Center left.
they will never hear the other side of this.
Yeah.
And so what the media is doing, and I think social media, news media, they're all doing the same thing. Even movies and TV, they're giving categories of people based on politics and demographics whatever they want, and so people are afraid. The world is chaotic, and so you need a villain, and Trump will fill that role for them. So there are media outlets, there are movies who will portray him that way because they know it sells.
But I am going to hold a moral charge against such people.
Yeah.
And the moral charge, because there are people, Sasha Stone has changed her mind because she looked into it herself. Barry Weiss has changed her mind. None of them really like Trump necessarily.
Yeah.
But they decided to look into it and thought, oh my goodness, what they're all saying about him, he doesn't believe any of these things. He doesn't do any of these things.
Right.
It's not true.
But as soon as those people quit saying it, they're out, and someone new will jump in.
I understand.
Because the purpose of a pundit is to say what they're told.
My point is the moral charge of a citizen of a free country to not think for themselves.
There you go. Yeah.
There's a moral charge. If you want to believe because they say that, you're culpable in our current
Yeah. It
climate.
reminds me, so I just looked this up, 2 Timothy 4. A time will come when people will not put up with sound doctrine, but to suit their own desires, they'll gather around them a great number of teachers to say what their itching ears want to hear.
Yeah.
I think that's exactly what we're seeing.
Yeah.
And we can blame, the specific media personalities, but they're all interchangeable.
And
it's on both sides.
They have culpability, the media personalities
No, they do.
But when you are an easy believe person, you also have culpability.
Yeah, I agree.
There's plenty out there. How in the world do you and I do this show and find all these things? Because there's plenty of information out there for you to weigh the sides and come to a conclusion.
Yeah.
And we still don't even have to agree, you and I.
And you don't even have to do it the depth we do.
I know, that's what I'm that's what I was trying
this
to
is
get
why
at.
we do this podcast, because we're trying to help people say, look, here's a few things. But the trick is you have to trust somebody.
Yeah.
So if you're like, I read a lot of stuff, I look into a lot of stuff, but if you don't trust me, then when I say this is true and that's not, you're going to go to the people you trust. And that's why it's a very spiritual thing going on.
Wait. When you say that, I thought you started out and meant something different. What I heard you say by the end was, it's wired into us to have trust, and that's why this is so difficult of a topic.
It's why I think that the culture war and the spirit war that the Bible talks about are so intertwined, because your spirits, the role or the function of your heart is to build trust and believe things, believe in people, believe in God, that He is good, and then that what He teaches you should submit to, right? And so that's also what media does. That's also what culture is about. That's why
any relationship, when you say something to another person, you're relying on that structure of trust building.
So it connects back
process.
to our conversation about Taylor Swift, that she has this connection with certain young women who they trust her, that she gets me. That's why someone will be brought to tears, besides the fact that they're just more connected with.
So the tyranny, not so much physical, but the tyranny even of working institutions, working media, when you have this role as a journalist, let's say, and you exercise tyranny in that, what you're saying is this is a double betrayal, not just of the facts of whatever statement, but of the underlying way we function as human.
Right. Yeah.
That's interesting. That's a great point.
So there is breaking news. I read this right before we came on. The Colorado Supreme Court has removed Trump from the ballot.
Oh, interesting.
They've which should be the final word on it.
For the state.
For the state. Yeah, for Colorado. Yeah. But it also sets
It'll
a precedent.
Get appealed.
Yeah, but I don't know that you can appeal because the Constitution gives balloting power to the states. I don't know that the Supreme Court can rule on it. Yeah, so I mean, the legislature of Colorado maybe could overturn it.
Yeah, right.
But there's no certainty that they would. Now,
that would
Colorado's not necessarily a swing state.
Yeah,
but it could spread, and there's a lot of swing states that do have Supreme Courts and attorney generals who are liberal in a state that might vote conservative later.
Do you have more to say on the Trump Colorado thing?
No, I just heard about it.
I think that's very surprising. I didn't think any of those were going to win.
Yeah.
Here's my first thought. It might not my first thought because it connects to another second thought, and that is Europe and Musk.
Elon,
that they basically open up a criminal investigation into Twitter because he is not doing what they say in censoring.
Oh yeah, because they have demands that he censors certain things.
And he's under investigation. So he also just lost some 100 million, or I don't remember, some kind of thing with SpaceX. The Biden administration took away a contract that he had won earlier.
Biden's gone after him a lot.
They're all going after him. And what I think is interesting about that, actually, I'll just say those two. Whenever you're ready to ask me about Alex Jones' interview, I want to bring up those two examples: the Trump in Colorado and the Europe and Musk, because I think they're very similar.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, Elon's standard, as I understand it, for X is...
Notice we're calling it X now.
Well, that's what it's called
It's
now.
starting to work.
It holds on. Is that whatever's legal in the jurisdiction, so if China makes it illegal to say things it'll be illegal on X. If America doesn't, it won't. I think that's the standard.
Illegal legislatively, rather than we just don't like it.
So his standard for free speech was whatever's legal, you can say.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if Europe is saying he's not censoring enough, he may just go along because that's been his standard. It'll be interesting to see. All right, you had something about the wrong answer on a test.
Oh.
There was a kid who failed a test because he
yeah.
wouldn't say that men can get pregnant.
Yeah. Well, he asked, "Can men get pregnant?" And he said no.
Yeah.
And he failed the test, even though he got the answer right. And it caused an uproar in school, caused an uproar with parents. And I was just reflecting on it in terms of the utilization of children in this war. And it's by virtue of their quote unquote legitimate, and yet we'd have to qualify what it means, their innocence. They're not yet warriors in this battle that can choose a side.
Okay.
And this is being leveraged against and, for on both sides. Not necessarily intentionally. It's the left who's provoking the leveraging, but then the right, there's no other choice but to respond, because how dare you tell my child a total lie and fail him because he speaks the truth. And now he's the tug of war between, but the parent has no choice.
Right.
The teacher chose the child as a tug of war. The only way the parent can respond is to keep the child as the tug of war.
So
and
part
how
of
grievous that was.
Teachers are trained on this, and there's a deep moral sense among educators that I've worked with and heard from over and over, is that they function around the idea that they fill in where the parents lack. And so if they feel like a parent should do something and isn't, they feel a moral obligation to do that, right? And there's a legal precedent for it called in loco parentis, where they're the parent of legal stature when the kid is at school. And I think the parents have been naive, although a lot are waking up to that sense that more and more teachers are assuming that parents don't do a good job. It's also what inspires that sense of like the teachers need to take over for parents. Mm-hmm. Because, well, if let's say, and this is sort of that welfare idea, is, if we don't give welfare, some people will starve. Therefore, we have to feed everybody.
Yeah.
And there's actually schools like that.
Yeah.
Because we have enough poor kids at this school, we just give free food to everybody.
Yeah.
And so it creates this sort of momentum toward letting the government do everything.
Yeah.
And on the other side of it, though, what the teachers do is they say, well, if one parent isn't going to tell their kids about sex, right? Or some won't.
Choose a different
Therefore,
strategy.
we have to tell them everything about sex.
Yeah,
it's our job.
Yeah.
And they're teaching things that more and more, even the public demands. Like I'll be in a Facebook conversation where I see people saying they should add this to the schools, right?
Yeah.
Why didn't the schools teach me about taxes?
Yeah.
Why didn't the schools teach me about food?
Yeah.
Right? Or maybe they did and it was wrong. That's not the school's job.
Yeah.
It's the parent's job. It's a culture's job.
That's what it's being transformed into, is not teachers of subject matters of learning. It's 6 hours of parenting, basically.
Well, and that's for sure. Or failing to and not being able to, because a teacher can never do that.
They can't. They're institutionally structured, so you cannot do that.
But if a teacher
no-win
says,
situation.
this is this parent's job, so I won't do it, what the compassionate teacher says is, some parents just won't, so we have to.
Yeah.
And that is the struggle of how schools have to find balance.
There's a teacher I argue with regularly about that, and I keep insisting you have to let them go home to a situation that's painful.
Right.
Because
life is painful.
Because it is, and it one more than another. Now, do you think that this perspective is gaining ground or losing ground?
The teachers?
Yeah.
I've seen no evidence that teachers are backing down. I've seen administrators being more strategic. Like when the critical race theory battle was really going on in like after 2020, and it was clear that conservatives were saying no more. What I saw a lot of administrators doing is saying, well, we're just not going to call it that, and we're going to move away from those terms so parents will get confused, and then we'll do what we want.
I read an article actually in the last day or two. It was about 2023. 40 states passed in some form of small to big educational reform things
Right.
around ESH, educational saving accounts. And interesting, Texas was not one of them. But 40 states from quite large movements, like West Virginia,
Yeah.
and to smaller steps. And that was all this last year. And the point of this article was to say there's a movement. It's changing. Public school, this argument asserted, was this author, public schools, maybe they're not in a panic mode yet, but times are changing. There's something afoot.
There is, but it's splitting more and more because there are many communities who are saying we want it more since you guys are saying no. So that's where remember I was saying those politicians swearing on with their hand on a stack of
literally saw an article
gay
about
pornography for kids.
Yeah. Pennsylvania.
It's school board members.
That's
it's
what
more
I
than
read.
Pennsylvania.
It was Pennsylvania school board.
But those communities are electing those people.
Yeah,
They're
yeah.
giving them what they want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other one that was interesting on that same front was Chicago, or basically Illinois. The teachers union got involved because they made a health saving, and they killed it. The teachers union basically killed this because they said it's public monies, and it must go to public teachers. It cannot be used for private because it's public money.
Right.
I thought that's interesting. That's a desperate plea because it's taxes. It's not technically, it's private money.
That's exactly. it's the taxpayers' money, literally.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that is the difference between that's the government employee mindset too.
I personally think, and we may have talked about this on air or not, or it might have been before we ever started doing our show. We're episode 44 and completing year 1 here.
There we go.
But I asked a question some time ago, potential unintended consequences of COVID and the lockdowns. And at the time, I prognosticated that one of them could be a change in education, that this could bring about a fundamental change. Because the lockdowns there was a form of evil involved in those, the masks and the vaccines and all that. And so you ask yourself, but the reality is this, that there's another king over the world, and things, the whole going along at a certain pace and clip, and whatever you read the rate of change, it's going to get better or worse. That's not what happens. And so even in a decline where things are going bad, God doesn't allow it to go bad at the rate it appears to be going bad right now.
There are interventions.
He intervenes always, every time. And it may be in 50 years, 5 years, 500, it doesn't matter. But he intervenes and changes things. And so when we looked at those events taking place, it was like a face of evil taking over our society and on a number of fronts. And it was tempting to only look at the difficult things that would result from this that this is a sign of the triumph of evil. But asking the question, well, what are unintended consequences that may turn out for good?
Yeah.
And one of them I thought then was education. And I hope, nothing wild has happened, but it may be a slow shifting taking place.
Well, there are, I think 3 or 4 states, there's several that are looking into expanding the voucher program.
Yeah.
I know a lot of homeschool families in Oregon who sort of work around, create their own kind of small voucher program.
Speaking of Texas on the vouchers, because voucher is a part of the language. In Texas, they tried to do this same savings account, turning the voucher, which has been like a 15-year question, right? Vouchers. Did you know that, and Abbott proposed it, there was 100 Republicans in the Texas legislature who shot it down.
Right.
And then they did the stats. They're supported by the teachers union.
Right.
The teachers unions literally give these Republicans money, and so they turn this down.
Well, I mean, how much of the evil in our culture is sourced out of the teachers unions?
Oh.
If you think of the gender ideology is sourced by them.
Yeah.
The lockdowns were perpetuated and extended because of them. There were so many things.
I remember in California when we lived there some time ago, late 90s, and Schwarzenegger was governor.
Okay.
And I really appreciated what he tried to do. He's a center-right guy, right? Mm-hmm. But he tried to do a thing, and he made some mistakes early on, but he was liked, like Reagan was. The Democrats enjoyed him because he was easy to talk to,
right,
charismatic, and et cetera, et cetera. You know how he got taken out from being politically castrated was the teachers union. He took on the teachers union in California, and he lost.
Yeah.
They beat him, and he was never the same again.
And what's crazy is the teachers union, their funds, their massive funds, are 100% tax dollars.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
They're skimmed off the top of every teacher's salary.
Yeah, I know.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
All right. Well, hey, this podcast is part of the Trinity School. It's a culture building enterprise that includes education, influence, industry, and the arts. If you want to support what's going on at the Trinity School, building communities that honor Christ, you can donate to our efforts by going to gracestaten.com/Trinity School. All right, let's talk a little bit about pop culture. I watched a movie. Obama made a movie. I think we mentioned it a couple episodes back. Him and Michelle. Although in the opening credits, it's on Netflix, and we don't pay for Netflix anyway, so we watched it. Nicole was curious. In the opening credits, Barack and Michelle's name, it just flashes for a second. It's covered. You barely see it.
Really?
Which was an interesting choice. But yeah, it was about the end of the world, right? That there's a tech breakdown of society by hackers or some other form, but very much like perspective of wealthy and well-to-do people and how they're going to survive or how useless they'll become, when the tech world is gone. Your phone's dead. There was an interesting phrase in there that I want to talk about, but it happened. It came out at the same time as the trailers dropped for a movie coming out in the spring called Civil War. And in this trailer, it portrays America breaking into 4 different factions. It talked about a third-term president. What was interesting, though, in both of those movies, as far as I've seen on this trailer, or the other one, there's no sense of Trump in any of them. It's just the sense that America has broken down and that we're going to turn against each other at any moment. And it makes me think about, is it priming the pump? Do you know what I'm saying?
I do. That was my
I
first
saw a lot of
when you
people
mentioned
saying
it.
it's predictive programming, that they're getting us used to the idea as it comes along. There's
That's the playbook.
There's one figure in the Leave the World Behind, the Obama movie, whose quote is, this figure is seen as an informed character, right? And the other people sort of don't know what's going on, but he does. And he talks about having a conversation a couple days prior with a connected and wealthy client for the job that they don't describe what he does. And this client tells him, it's not a conspiracy. No one is in control. No one is pulling the strings. It's just that the rich people get a little bit of a warning, and so they'll be prepared. And I thought, that's Obama's influence right there, that he wants us to think. I mean, this is the conspiracy side, right?
That's right.
But if it's not Obama, it's those folks in control, or they're not really in control. They're creating the chaos, hoping that they'll come out on top in the end with a new world formed in the aftermath.
I actually personally think this is the meaning of that phrase, the Lord's, if they had known the Lord of glory, and there's a play in there on Paul, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory.
Right.
And I think what's interesting about that is you can't tell in the context. It's the same words, kurios and the authorities. I think it's authorities. It's the same word that can be applied to human rulers, but it's literally the same words applied to spiritual powers as well.
Right. Yeah.
And the context does not clarify which one is in mind here.
Yeah.
And I actually think that's intentional, and I think it's because it's a fuzzy ground. We don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but flesh and blood still become extensions of invisible powers.
So is that true like in Ephesians, right? It says we don't wrestle with flesh and blood, but principalities, powers, and rulers in dark places. And I always wondered, and I don't know if the Greek spells this out, but do the first have to be also in dark places?
Oh,
do you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Because he talks repeatedly in Ephesians about the heavenly places, the heavenly realms, and that seems to be what that's about. But is it only that third one? Is it kings and rulers of the earth and
no? The language is never words that would be about kings and rulers of the earth.
But isn't it a principality?
It's not. Yeah, principalities. That's an English. The words could be for unfallen angels. They don't necessarily have to be dark. Okay. Though the majority of them are dark.
But when he talks about principalities and powers, it certainly is about spiritual things.
Yeah, it's not. Those words are never used for the rule.
But because I was curious because it seems to intertwine, and that's always what I was wondering.
I know it does intertwine. That's my point.
So part of what I always think about too, and this is a question I've come across reading in Revelation recently, trying to study it, is so much symbolism.
Yeah.
And movies are in the business of symbolism.
Yeah.
I mean, and the more I think about this and watch movies, the less I enjoy them. But it also starts to say, oh, okay, they're portraying this on purpose. It symbolizes a trope, or it symbolizes a sense of like, oh, I relate to them, and that is what I want, right? And so in that movie, there's the authoritative figure I was talking about is a black man.
Yeah.
And then the Julia Roberts character is this very fearful and controlling and manipulative woman. But then there's sort of this weird romantic tension that forms toward the end of the movie. And you think, what are they playing with that dynamic of racial tensions and yet sexuality and all this stuff? And I think there's symbols everywhere.
Yeah, they are.
And I don't know how much credence to give that. Do you know what I mean? Because sometimes it feels like it's silliness.
Yeah. Jerry Lewis, you know Jerry Lewis, a comedian?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, he's passed away recently.
Right. Okay.
Did you watch any of his films?
Yeah.
60s, 50s?
Nutty Professor.
Yeah. Those are, those ones. And Dean Martin, all this stuff. Anyway, so he's probably the top, there was a time when he was the top grossing Hollywood person.
He was the biggest star.
That's right.
He was like Jim Carrey in his heyday, but for a lot longer.
Yeah. So he is a comedian. Everybody laughs. Goofy. No
over the
sense.
top. Right.
Over the top. Did you know in France, they revered him as an incredibly subtle and deep movie maker? Sincerely.
Wait, movie maker?
Movie maker, producer,
in his
actor.
acting.
Well, he did both. He after he split with Martin, he produced most of his own stuff.
Okay.
He wrote his own. He wrote it, produced it. He did everything.
So they saw something deeper behind his craziness.
Incredibly deeper. They honored him. You could go watch interviews that they have with him in French audiences. Highly respectful. And they think American audiences have completely missed the subtlety, that they've only caught the humor and goofiness and completely missed how Jerry Lewis is tapping into deep mythic components of human nature and things of significance to who we are as people. Which is in my mind, I mention it because it goes to what you're saying. I think there's a lot of intentionality. Not that there always is, but I think there's a lot more than we think.
Well, it makes me think about, I used to listen to Jordan Peterson a lot, and he would talk about the symbols and the archetypes, right?
The archetypes. I didn't want to go Jungian on you, but
yeah. Well, he does a lot.
Yeah. I agree with them. I think there's truth in them.
So there's something about humans that want to convey life and understand life in those symbolic ways.
So getting to the nut of it, I think it's the Genesis 3. We've eaten of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil prematurely.
Right.
And now we are cut off from knowing the things that we were made to know and understand, so we're ever grasping to understand them. We are lost. We're disconnected from ourselves, each other, nature, and God, because we took that prematurely, which was He was going to connect those for us at the right times. We took them, and we don't do well with any of them. And so we always search. So meta-narrative is extremely important to us, to have some sense of overarching.
Yeah.
What does this mean?
Part of what I keep thinking, though, so one of the analysis that I saw, and I noticed it in the movie, in one of the opening scenes, or maybe the opening scene, there's a man in a bed talking to his wife who's up in the room, and on the wall behind him is a clock that says 6, and then a little block of wood that has 6, and on the other side of the bed is another clock that's like a different one that says 6, and it's 6 o'clock in the morning. So of course, but that people were saying, "Oh, it's 666. It's a symbol." But I think you could see symbols everywhere.
That is true.
And it reminds me as a kid, right? We weren't allowed to watch the Smurfs.
Oh, Smurfs.
Because the Smurfs would do these incantations, and magic wasn't good, right? And the
Yeah.
occult obviously has this root to demonic.
Azrael.
But I remember hearing a sermon as a kid too, talking about how the Ewoks were demons and the ET was a demon. And I was like, okay, well, it's just a fuzzy kid, kid Star Wars, right?
Okay, so
but people they believe in Star Wars.
Getting bigger. This I don't know what you think about this. Providence. Do you believe? I'm asking you what you think.
Okay.
Do you believe the scriptures teach that God is under His care every detail of events? Or do you
under His care? Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Okay. Let's change the word.
I'm not like a
out.
determinist.
Well, determinism is not God. There is no view of God in determinism. Determinism is a view that has God out of the picture because events have forced Him into hand. No, it's a misnomer to say that there is a view that believes in God and then has a determinism.
Okay.
That isn't a view. There is
Well, a lot of people, when they
godless-
talked about sovereignty,
yes,
they'll say that every atom, I've heard R.C. Sproul talk about this, right? That if there's one atom that God did not sovereignly decree its
that's right.
trajectory, then
Yeah.
God doesn't exist.
Yeah, but that's not determinism. So that's what I believe. What you just said. That's
Yeah.
what I believe.
Right.
And that's not the same as determinism. I believe that exists within a framework of our choices from our perspective, having a liberty to put the pen on this cap or not to.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that behind the workings of the awareness that we have of our will, that God isn't acting.
Right.
So it gets to the question of is God in control of every event or not in control?
Mm-hmm.
And so the reason I think it's significant is because it's very tempting to not want to believe he's in control of all events, even though Scripture, there's got to be 100 statements that state it explicitly. It just causes such conundrums for us that we wiggle out here and there.
Wait, that
for
state
different
that he
reasons.
is in control.
Yeah, of
Okay.
everything.
Okay.
There's not a single thing that happens that he's not in control of. And so I think that's important because you can read symbols everywhere, right?
Yeah.
In such a way that it becomes silly. But then the argument tries to say to you, well, those are just chance. And see, as a Christian, I don't believe that there is any chance at all.
Yeah, but how do you keep from then reading nonsense into everything?
Because just because I think everything is done on purpose, but that doesn't mean everything is a message to me particularly.
Right.
And so I think we take the dilemma we get into is we have this idea that God is in control of everything.
Okay.
And then we find ourselves over-interpreting and we get lost.
Yeah.
So we backtrack and say, well, maybe God's not in control of everything. Maybe there's just accidents in the world.
Oh, I see.
And because we get lost on the path where the Bible starts us, we backtrack and end on a path where it doesn't say, and we feel more comfort there.
Well, so here's how I think about it, because I don't agree with you on the Calvinism question or on God. I think free will exists, and I think God calls us to that. But what I feel like it can easily become like the English teacher who thinks that everything's a symbol in the novel, right? And that the novelist actually has this 3 layers deep metaphorical understanding. And when the novelist is just writing the book, like he just thinks it's a good story. But good stories do speak to deeper things. So you can see it, even when they don't intend it.
Chesterton's point is all story is Genesis 3.
Yeah.
All story.
Right.
Even if you try to write a good story with nothing, you cannot help. If it is a good story, it's going to tap into bigger stories. You can't stop it.
This makes me think of Alex Jones, which we wanted to talk about,
Yeah.
right? Because
Yeah.
he sees conspiracy and
So,
intention behind
Let's do Alex
everything
Jones,
that happens.
but I just want to make a statement.
Okay.
To be a Calvinist does not, I believe humans have free moral agency.
Uh-huh.
So it is not the same as,
Oh, we're getting into terms.
yeah.
And
I don't want
haven't
to
studied all
have the
terms
discussion.
exactly.
I just don't want it to say, oh, so Mike's a Calvinist. He doesn't believe in free will. That's not what I believe.
So are there Calvinists who don't believe in free will? Because that's kind of my understanding.
Yeah, they could say that, but no, not really. No.
The best I heard it, and I'm not trying to get into it either,
Yeah.
but I just want to clarify. The best I heard it, I think it was a John Piper sermon a long time ago, is that it's everyone gets to choose, but when God sovereignly elects you, you always choose.
Yes. So Edwards
But
wrote
to me,
a
functionally,
large
that
book.
just means free will doesn't exist.
Okay. I'll make the case that free
Even
will
if
doesn't
philosophically
exist.
it's different.
I'll make one argument that free will doesn't exist, even for God.
Okay.
Okay. And so if this is what people think, free will is 100%, I could go A, 100%, I could go B.
Okay.
And nothing coerces me. I don't believe in that. And I don't think God has that. God is constrained to do good. He does not have free will. God himself, he cannot do evil.
He behaves within his nature.
He behaves within his nature. So Edwards, an inquiry into the nature of the freedom of the will, he says the will, yes, is free. Of course, that's how God made us.
Jonathan Edwards.
Jonathan Edwards, the strongest Calvinist in America
Yeah.
history. But the will must follow the desire, the greatest desire of the human heart. but the desires are below the level of our perceptions. We don't understand. They don't present themselves to us as choices. They exist, and we don't even aren't aware of them.
Yeah, they're spiritual, not mental.
They're spiritual, and yes, that's right. So at the level of our mental faculties, we have the freedom of choice in all things. But underneath them, because and he basically said the will follows the human desire. You do the thing you have the greatest desire for. And the problem with humanity in the fall is it now desires rebellion. And in that way, its will is enslaved to evil. It's not free in the way that God meant it. It's still free at the functional level of we look out and path A and path B. You can choose either one.
Well, and that's the
But when you
that's
get
the total
underneath
depravity question, right? Is that nature completely depraved in such a way that no one can turn toward God in any way?
And the definition of what completely means, and
then we get it goes on and on. All right.
But anyway,
Alex Jones.
Alex
Symbols,
Jones.
Conspiracy theories, plans.
Did you
within
watch the
plans.
interview?
I did. I think I missed.
Did you
maybe
enjoy
the
it
last
or not
15
enjoy
minutes.
it?
I thought it was interesting. I was doing other things. I didn't watch it. I
Yeah.
listened to it.
Yeah.
Tucker Carlson.
Yep.
He's
Tucker
very
Carlson.
disarming in his interview style, right? He's very like
He is.
jovial and like that's crazy, and he has these questions of like I'm confused, I'm curious. When in
Well,
fact he knows exactly what he's saying, but it's a very
True.
charming sort of way that he has.
He reminds me of Regis Philbin.
Really?
Yeah. In this regards.
Okay.
He is not interviewing really with an explicit goal. He does have a direction he's pointed,
Yeah.
but he's willing to ask you, and if you go in a different direction, he's not going to stop you. He's curious. He thinks you're already aiming a place that he wants to aim. That's why he's interviewing you.
Yeah.
But then he's going to ask you, why are you doing this?
That's very much the Joe Rogan style of interviewing as well.
Oh, is it?
Because it's the long form podcast.
Yeah.
We can have these
It's
meandering
curious.
conversations.
Yet still pointed, but it's
Right.
curious too.
Yeah.
Tell me
Yeah, yeah.
why. And if you end up pointing a different direction than I thought you were going to be, I'm okay with that. I might never have you on again. That's fine. Not because I didn't like you, but because I'm aiming in a direction.
Yeah.
And that's what Philbin, I thought of him. He asked questions. He wanted to know what they thought.
So what did you take from the Alex Jones in that
Anyway,
conversation? Did you
okay.
know much about him before the interview?
Somewhat, but I would say I was in the same place that Tucker Carlson said he had been in before talking more. And that is, it's difficult. He's got the strange, weird voice, right? Like a super smoker, gravelly voice.
I started impersonating just hearing
Oh,
him.
yeah. And so that does two things. Number one, it's very cool.
Okay.
But number two, it lends itself to being highly suspicious.
Is it a persona, though? The voice?
Well, I've seen him talk not off camera, but off interview outside.
Right.
That he talks that way.
There's a couple clips out there of like Michael Jackson just accidentally using a normal voice and then kicking back into the high-pitched voice.
That is hilarious. I didn't know
But
that.
there are people who are public personalities
Yeah,
and their
they create.
personas are on all the time because they know they're
Well,
on.
maybe it is. I don't know.
Yeah, anyway.
But in any case, I think the thing is he's a sensationalist by nature and a provocateur by temperament.
Yeah.
And then when you couple it with that deep voice, it makes for not an unbelievable, but his earnestness is set aside because it's masked by the voice and the sensationalism. It masks earnestness. So my wife listened to the same thing when I watched it the other day. She's baking cookies and listening to this. I force-fed her on the TV. And I asked her what she thought because it was very impactful to me. Her first things were, the tone and the sensationalism, she can't get past them.
Because it's like a salesman.
It is. It's
Yeah.
all those things that speak of disingenuousness.
Right.
And so I think I've often felt that from him, even though I thought it was interesting, some of the things he said. I just didn't have the time for sensationalists.
Well, and that there is a target audience for that, right? And it's you and me and a little bit older.
Yeah.
In the sense that, there's a lot of pundits that are like this. Who's the guy? Mark Levin.
Yeah.
I turn him on occasionally, and he's just screaming.
Yeah,
And I'm like,
I
oh my
can't-
gosh.
yeah, it's too
but
much.
somebody's getting churned up by that.
Michael
Do you know what I'm
Savage
saying?
had some of that.
Yeah. It's like this rage machine.
Yeah.
That there are and I think Alex Jones's audience must be 90% men. You know what I mean?
Yeah, probably. But any case, so I had that going in, And then he'd been canceled. I knew that. And I just figured the whole Sandy Hook, I thought what was said about him was true, that he denied that it actually happened.
Right.
And I thought that's lunacy. That's nutso. And this is what Tucker opens the interview with, saying, honestly, mea culpa, I thought he's nutso.
Right.
But now I've gotten to know him. Oh my goodness, he's not. And he's predicted a bunch of stuff. And he has the best explanation for what's going on than anybody I've heard.
He predicted 9/11, method, and target. Right? Planes into the World Trade Center like 2 months in advance.
I've never asked my show to call the White House. And I said to people like 5 months before 9/11, call the White House. This is what they're going to do.
Yeah.
He's saying things now of what they're going to do. And anyway, I was deeply impacted to hear the stories, to hear Tucker ask him questions. And what I like about Tucker's honesty is he's unafraid to say, to ask a question that you wish you could ask. I mean, when you ask Trump, do you think they're going to assassinate you? Dude, I've been wondering that since 2016, you know?
Yeah.
And so when he says to Alex Jones, how did you make this prediction? I mean, how? You've been right. It's ridiculous. And I thought you were nuts. How?
But he's been wrong a lot too. That's the hard part.
Okay, so he didn't really bring how many times he's wrong, right?
Well, but part of the thing is when you're making these statements, and I
know.
think 9/11's the exception, but Sandy Hook's a decent example. You make these statements that are like, well, this is going to happen, this is going to happen. That's how the Q conspiracy got going too, because it was all these vague and coded messages saying, well, something is going to happen soon.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, eventually something does happen.
What I end up thinking is that where he suffers is he sees things just because he says this is what's going to happen. It may be what they're intending, but they may not be able to pull it off.
Okay.
Just because it doesn't happen doesn't mean he was right to see this is what they want to happen.
They were trying.
Yeah, that's
and they
right.
failed. Okay.
So even the Sandy Hook thing, I really don't know enough evidence. It would not surprise me at all to find out that that was a planted process intentionally to take Second Amendment rights.
That, in other words, that somebody's influencing kids or young men
with
who
an
are
agenda
on the verge of violence.
That's right.
And persuading or influencing them.
Just like, to be honest, and we mentioned it briefly, and I'll say it, though it would probably be unpopular, I am completely for Israel exercising its right to destroy Hamas in a war.
Yeah.
However, I also think that the odds are more than 50% that they knew about it and turned this and used this catastrophe in order to, that Netanyahu and the Israeli Defense Forces, chose to allow, if not with specificity, with some porousness, an event that would create movement.
Right? Interesting.
I'm not against that having happened. I think it's over the 51% possibility. So to say that, there's a little bit of conspiracy in that. My wife had long conversations about why conspiracy. Why do we like them? Why do we not like them? Mm-hmm. Why is one person geared towards them, one person not?
Yeah.
And it was all because of that interview with him.
Alex Jones.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right, well.
Wait, I want to say one more thing about it.
Okay, yeah.
Because I want to ask you about this, if you felt this. Because I'm gathering by your response that you didn't. I felt utterly discouraged by it.
Oh, yeah.
Because
it makes the enemy seem so powerful.
Yep.
And intricately woven in.
And I don't disbelieve. I think he has an incredible gift at sifting information. I think he is you and me temperament times 3, times 10, whatever you want to say.
Sure.
He has this thing where a little analytical, likes gathering information, sees connections, and what we're playing with, he's operating at an entirely, with millions of dollars.
Okay, so that connects me to the predictive programming, the Obama movie. Because I'm watching that and I'm thinking, are we really prepared for this to go down, for the whole internet to drop off, and for people to be looking for food and electricity to be unreliable? And do we? And I start making a shopping list. Right?
I know.
It feels like, okay, is Alex Jones serving the same purpose as Obama in creating this fear? Because when people are afraid, they want someone to be in control.
That's a very good point. Let me restate and see if I heard you right. In one sense, you're saying, if there's an evil intention on one person and a good intention on another, but the outcome is fear,
they're serving
from
the same
both.
Purpose. Yeah.
Even if they don't intend to serve a similar purpose, something similar is being brought out of them.
Well, and it doesn't have to be an intention
Yeah.
in an overt way. Like, it doesn't have to be that Obama is hoping to be made dictator or something like that, right? But when you create chaos and fear, you will always get people who say someone needs to take charge. It's like if you're in a violent neighborhood and you think, I'm helpless in this, I need to get a bigger gun.
Well, that's not, Alex Jones is not calling for that, someone to take charge.
No, but
right?
he's inspiring the fear. He's obviously not creating the chaos, but he's observing it. And it might be that fear is warranted.
Okay, I was just
Do you know
going
what
to
I'm
ask
saying?
you that question.
So it's not, I'm not saying
Let's
it's wrong,
take
but it
those
does
two
serve the
guys.
same purpose.
Let's take those two guys out. Obama, put him off the edge. Alex Jones, put him off.
Yeah.
They're spiritual forces that are after the same thing.
Yeah.
Does that not speak to us? It asks us what we're going to do with the question of fear, doesn't it?
And that God hasn't given us a spirit of fear.
And so we have an answer from God about how to hear the fact that there is a massive plot to destroy you,
Right.
but don't respond in fear.
So here's what that would mean then. If the ministry of Alex Jones or the ministry of Barack Obama, right?
Yeah, right, that's right.
Is to inspire fear, you can conclude that's not from God.
Yeah. Well,
Now,
but wait a minute.
it
Even
doesn't
if
mean
it's not
you're
Alex
not gonna
Jones,
learn
I
from
don't
them.
get that from him, that he's trying to create fear.
Well, I'm saying I don't know what he's trying to do. I think he's trying to educate people. And I think if he's right on half the stuff he's talking about, fear is not an illegitimate reaction to that.
Okay.
But
right.
there's a ministry, there's this, like you're saying, we're putting them aside. There's a spiritual component behind it, that the spirit of fear is using media to infiltrate our hearts and degrade the trust that we have in one another, right? In our marriages, in our churches, in our communities.
Yeah.
And so we have to resist. We have to act against that and build trust.
A way to say what you said also, what I heard, that's a good point. It would be this. Whether you and I disagree with Obama's, what seemed to be his intentions and aims, and even if we liked Alex Jones's, by doing what they're doing, when the fear option comes to us, we have to resist that no matter which side it is speaking. Because the fear result is not from God.
Right.
Even if they say true things.
And it doesn't mean that being prepared for a terrible outcome that seems possible, that's not wrong.
Yeah.
Right? But fear shouldn't be the reason.
Yeah, that's right.
And so what is the motive of what is the godly motive of a prepper?
Yeah.
That he can provide for his family, that he can be a leader and a provider of his community.
Yeah.
Which means it can't just be, I need to get more food to store.
Yeah.
Because there's a limit on that, barring a miraculous expansion of food supply, right? Which Jesus obviously did, and I've heard of it happening in modern times. But it needs to be, what are the systems that we can build so that we would be able to replace food, so that we could be able to provide electricity consistently and think community and not just think insular and walls and protection.
I think what was difficult for me was when Obama does what he does, and I've said on here, I've named him at once Obama the Destroyer.
Yeah.
And I do think that there's an intention. You've talked about chaos and tyranny in order that there might be a tyrant.
Yeah.
I don't think that's Alex Jones, but when he says what is being aimed at, and here's one of the statements he made in that interview, over a 20-year period, he says everything they aimed at, they eventually have been able to do in the time I've been seeing it and watching it and talking about it.
Yeah, right.
It's been on this 20-year delay.
I heard
what
that.
they said in the 60s, and by the early 80s, late 70s, it was being implemented.
Yeah.
And that causes a fear response. But he's doing it to try to say what's true and warning. So that made me think.
But it also makes you feel helpless.
It does make you feel helpless. But then I started saying, that's a me issue, though. That's a Mike issue.
Yeah.
And two things I started to say to myself. Number one, Psalm 2, why do the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain? The kings and the armies raise themselves up against the Lord and against his anointed. And you go on and do the whole thing.
And he sits in heaven and laughs.
That's right.
Yeah.
He is not going to let this happen.
That's right.
And so I think to myself that you have to speak gospel truth to yourself.
Right.
In order to calm your fears, because we're not given a spirit of fear, but of power, of love, and of sound mind. Number two, I thought to myself, just because it's spoken of true, it never works out that way. If we had lived, I think to myself, for however bad it sounds right now, and it sounds as I'm 54, a few years older than you. It's not much. We're of a similar age. In our life, it is never. We've never had something like this.
Right.
But the World War people had one. It was probably worse. I mean, World War II. I meant World War II.
Well, one was no.
I know one
picnic
was a
either,
bad
but yeah,
thing too, but World
right.
War II, I think you could think the end of the world.
Right.
Around the World War I would say Russia. Think about Lenin and Trotsky, this nation. They must have thought this is the end of the world.
Yeah.
It was devastation, right? So what we're experiencing is not the worst even in the last 100 years. There's probably 2 others that are worse. We're in 3rd place.
Yeah, currently. It's the
the
what's
last 100
next, right?
Yeah.
That's the
Yeah,
crazy
that's right.
question.
Up to today.
Like COVID wasn't actually
Yeah.
that bad.
But here's the thing. The Russian, the Trotskyism, Russia is in 100 years of that. It was like 1920, right? 1919, 1920. And we're basically 100 years from that. They are not in that anymore. They've not yet recovered.
Yeah.
The remnants of that control via USSR, via Kremlin. Putin is a Kremlin SVR agent. That's not, but the process of recovery is undergoing.
Yeah.
It's just been 100 years.
Well, yeah, things echo.
Yeah.
Yeah, for a
World
long
War
time.
II, I just saw an article, somebody made the point, the Western nations, this guy wrote an article that said, we're not capable of World War III right now in the way that we think of World War I and II. And he talked about ground armies and nuclear weapons, and an interesting idea. I'm not sure that it's entirely
there are
true.
weapons that we don't know about.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
His point was insurgents war is more what is taking the world stage.
so the solution though, the solution to that helpless feeling, that overwhelmed, man, the evil is huge out there, to me, is the culture building enterprise, is to say, okay, one, is my family doing well? Am I caring for my sons in ways that build confidence? Because I think insecurity is the root of all manner of dysfunction, right? I think the Garden of Eden is a story of insecurity, and maybe God's not going to take care of us, right? And that's what we're experiencing right now, that same question. So then, all right, I'm seeing, and I brought up, the questions of marriage and loneliness and relationships breaking down all over the place, right? Kids without parents. And most teachers are seeing this. I mean, the majority of kids born today don't have married parents, right? The majority. I saw this graph, and I was looking for it. I couldn't find it. But the source of how did people meet who got married? Okay, they met at work. They met through friends at church, and then online appeared right in the late 90s. And now all the other ways that people have met are under 5%. It's between 2 and 5% for every other method. Family, friends, church, work.
They're all under 5%?
Bars, they're all under 5%, and internet is 90.
Seriously?
90%.
How people that got married, how they originally met?
Yep.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and so, but the perpetually online, like I was watching this online confession. This girl is posting her in real time, finding out that she has herpes and that she'll never not have it. And she's in her early 20s, but she's selfie videoing, I'm about to go to the doctor, this is crazy, and tells the story of her symptoms, and it's like so revealing, right? And then in tears, what am I going to do? How am I going to tell my parents? And people are saying, why are they confessing this stuff? And you see these videos of these, usually women, making these really heartbreaking and over, they're lonely.
Yeah.
They don't have real friends.
Yeah.
And that's what broke. That's part of what COVID broke. And so when you're that lonely, that the only affirmation and connection you can find is people hitting like on a social media app, that's a deep, dark place.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no marriage is going to solve that.
Yeah.
Right. And that's
Actually,
been the
it's
tale
gonna
of our
bring
culture.
out the deeper fissures.
That's right. And it's going to cause you to stop trusting when you say, well, this man or this woman is going to be the solution, is going to heal my heart. And then they break your heart, or they just have their own broken heart already. Mm-hmm. And so now you stop saying, well, no, there is no solution. And it creates that hopelessness. And so the gospel is the solution, right? It makes men worthy of marriage. It makes women worthy of motherhood and being a wife. And so we've got to build those people that build a culture. Because I think in the same way that, like, I think of my grandfather who came out of World War II, right? He was at Pearl Harbor. He fought in the Pacific. He killed many men with his bare hands and rarely spoke of it till the end of his life, into his 80s. He was a broken man, and God healed him when he was in his 60s, mid-60s. There was a healing of a bitterness and a brokenness. Well, cultures get broken too.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to build more than just ourselves or our family. We have to build something bigger.
This article on the World War III, one of his points was that the Western civilization has not yet recovered from World War II. We're still broken from it, which is something
I think
and I
World
have
War
talked
II
about.
is a symptom of so much more too. I think
Yeah,
it
a
goes
root.
farther back. Yeah, and
Yeah.
I've talked about what is it the four horsemen of the 1800s, Darwin and Marx and who's
You
the
don't like Freud.
Freud, and there was one other.
uh,
Actually, I think Einstein is usually put as that first one, not for his own purposes, but because relativity created relative thinking about everything, and it sort of broke that sense of solidity that people had philosophically. All right, but I want to talk about one more thing, that dating thing. What are the number one red flags among men and among women in a dating environment? Any guesses? What's the biggest red flag among women? Among women, this
women
red flag.
towards men. Like
Looking
if
at
I'm
men,
a woman and this is my
if I
red
see
flag.
this,
If I see you,
he's out.
violence.
And it's 76%.
Or anger or violence.
76% of women say this is my number one red flag.
Anger or violence.
It's a MAGA Republican.
Oh,
All right. And then 64% of men, and these are
when they look at a
people in their
woman,
20s, I assume,
controlling.
communist.
So I was looking at emotional
Because
interactive traits.
you won't find violence or controlling behaviors in the first couple dates, right? Which is when red flags come in.
You're looking at
you're talking
tags
about
at a
talking
higher
about other
up
things.
level. Communist. Well, that's hilarious to say communist, because the thing is about MAGA. How did you pronounce it just a second ago?
A MAGA Republican.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
MAGA.
yeah.
That's what I said too. People were saying MAGA a lot at first.
Oh, yeah.
I thought MAGA anyway. Anyway.
But to me, that solidifies that the culture war is actually the battle of the sexes.
Mm-hmm.
It's men and women separated. For the first time, and I don't know when, graduating high school boys,
Well,
the majority are conservative,
Yeah.
self-identifying conservative.
Yeah. I mean, this is the same. I don't know if you were even thinking about this when you came across that article, but the week before or 2 weeks before, I had a very similar point made in seeing an article about what they're seeing in meeting each other. And it wasn't the same article, but it was really the same point. You know what that's going to lead to, but we won't do it today, but I'll do it as a teaser. I've been looking into that word I'd mentioned a couple episodes ago about exchanging. In Romans 1. And I've been doing some research on that, and I'm a few steps down a pathway that I think that's intriguing. And all I'll say right now, there is male femaleness, unique things going on, I think, in that passage. And
okay.
And
It talks about sexuality and
it does.
Yeah.
But there is something uniquely to each of them, because there's initiation of response by the woman. And then there's a subsequent response, and the language of the original forces into that this, then as a result, this.
And this is Romans 1.
Romans 1.
Yeah.
And then the teaser is that the idea of exchanging, that word changing, is the same word that earlier it said they changed their perspective of God, the immortal, invisible one, to one made in the likeness of an animal.
Right.
It's the exact same word, changing. And it's actually used a little earlier too, which gives some hints as well. So the idea of exchanging, of this changing, that it's not just out of the blue. This is all I'm going to say here. It's not just out of the blue, result of sin. It resulted in some forms of homosexual stuff. No, this changing thing is there's several steps in this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And,
it's a progression. It's a slide.
it's a progression, even including that. And the changing is connected to the changing of worshiping idols, the true God.
It's interesting to think. So Paul is writing these things in Rome, or to Romans rather, right?
Yeah.
Who are living in the heart of a culture that's also declining. You know, Rome
It's
doesn't
in its
really
first
fall,
stages. Yeah.
but you lose the republic around that era.
Well,
right?
it had been lost. Caesar had crossed the Rubicon already. It
Okay.
was not what it was, but it was not yet what it would come to be.
But he's seeing the decadence that
That's
turns
right.
to destruction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's in its first stages, and he's seeing it. Yes.
And then speaks of it in 2 Timothy. That's what we were talking about earlier. All right. Well, I want to come to a couple things. One, last week you recommended the book Dominion by Tom Holland.
did.
I didn't read it, but I went and looked him up and listened to a couple of his lectures.
Oh, okay.
Interesting
Would you
guy.
like to borrow the book?
Sure. Yeah.
I meant to bring it, actually, literally, because I loaned it to Tom, my friend, and he finished it. We had a long conversation about it. I'll bring it. You can read it.
Okay.
It's a big one.
One of the thoughts I had, so his premise, right, as we talked about, is that what we think of as compassion and rooting for the underdog is in many ways in our culture the influence of Christianity.
That's right.
And I watched him have a conversation with an atheist where he said, "Yeah, you're an atheist, but you're still a Christian.
You don't even
you
realize
just took God out.
how Christianized your atheism is."
And if you look at how atheists criticize Christians,
Yes.
it's for being not Christian enough.
Yes, that's right.
And it's like, no. If you actually go down the road, and I think that's what Romans 1 is really describing, and it's where our culture is headed, is that atheists want to stand on the foundation of Christ without Christ. They want a culture that's built on that, but they want the foundation removed, I guess is how I would say it, right? As Jesus would say, that the wise man who follows his teachings is building his house on the rock. And what we're doing is we're pushing our house off the rock into the sand, thinking storms won't come. And they're coming.
Yeah.
And so
but we want the same house.
We want the house. We just don't want it on the rock, right? Because the view is so much better down here on the beach. Yeah. And so I agreed with a lot of what he's saying, but part of what I saw then is, and this is interesting to me, and it made me think of like a rotation, is our culture, if you take that compassion that he's saying is sourced in Christianity and you take it too far, you end up in communism. Because communism is saying...
Did he say that?
He did.
He did not say anything like that in the book.
Okay, so what he was talking about...
because he didn't flesh out some negative sides.
Because it starts to sort of feel like he's supporting it. That's my impression last week when we talked.
He gave a little bit of that more than I would, but I wasn't going to write off his good points because I don't like certain things.
But what communism is doing is saying, if Christianity elevates the servant and the victim, the slave, and says, no, God has a place, blessed are those who are poor, right? And what communism says is, no, we don't need God's blessing. We're going to go get it for ourselves.
Yeah.
Which is when I talk about how kids struggle and they turn into that power struggling mindset, they go from insecurity to a like, I'm going to take control now.
And over, yeah.
Yeah,
They
but
overshoot.
that's what insecurity always creates, a desire for control.
Yeah.
Which is what I was talking about when cultures cry out for Napoleon.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because this chaos just can't live. We can't
Yeah.
survive this.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So it'll be fun to look into that a little bit more. All right, I did talk to a viewer who had a quote for us. He didn't want to post it because I think it would identify him with it, but
Okay.
here's what he said. The quote was, "Parents can't approve a tattoo for a minor, but can approve a sex change." I thought, oh, there you go.
No, the other way around. The kid can't approve a tattoo, but he can approve his own sex change.
No. Well, that's true as well. But what he was saying was, if you're a parent of a 12-year-old, you can't take him in to get a tattoo. It's illegal.
Oh, gotcha.
Right? But you can take him in to get cross-sex hormones.
Okay, yeah.
They'll give him to him in a day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I see.
30-minute appointment.
He wasn't pointing out inconsistency. Yeah. That's, yeah.
But I think that's another issue of law and morality, right? Because law and morality are inseparable.
Yeah. Well, that's the point that Tucker was making in that one speech he gave where he said politics is really right now non-existent. He says, because none of these are for gain.
Yeah.
That as a parent, you can't take your kid into a tattoo at 12. They've got to wait till they're 14 or whatever it is. It's not, whether that's the state's right to tell the parent that or not, there's a good intended. We're trying to protect a child, right?
There's also this shaking your fist at God sense to it as well.
Well, that's what he's saying. It is for pure and utter destructive purposes. No good is to come out of this.
Well, but so the good that I think they see is that we can become like God without
I think
his
that's
help.
exactly what it is.
We can make ourselves in our own image.
It is the rebellion. I don't know how deeper, and maybe it can get deeper, but there is a rebellion. You and I argued about this a long time ago.
Yeah.
About if this is the depths of the depravity, because I argued when you get down to undo the foundations of who we are, in one sense, there is no deeper you can go to object to God.
Philosophically.
At another level, you can do evil things.
Yeah.
You rape and murder people. And in one sense, it's worse. But in another sense, you've left the foundations of what God. When you rape somebody, if you murder, well, let's just say rape, you are taking and yet still taking a good thing God made, but completely perverted and twisted.
Yeah.
To destroy the good thing and say there's no male, female, that's an utter destruction of what God made. There's nothing left over.
Which is interesting that you make the comparison, because the vast majority of these kids or adults who undergo these procedures, they'll never have sex again.
That's exactly right.
It's not only that, they're sterilized, so they'll never have kids.
Yeah.
And they'll never have a healthy sexual relationship.
Yeah.
They just can't.
I was thinking about this, another hint on the exchange one when we get there, but part of the thing is that they exchanged or changed, and it has this phrase, the natural use. And then for I know there's unnatural, whatever, but in Greek, it's actually the against nature.
Right. Wow.
Against nature. And I was thinking about that, and it's the women that do this, and then the men follow suit. And I was thinking, you know what it's pointing at? We can't escape in our rebellion. Our sexuality as people is the fundamental aspect of who we are as
Our
individuals.
sexuality?
Yeah. The maleness of Mike. Mike is male, me.
So not your sexual attraction, but
Not your
sex itself.
The fact that I'm male and everything that comes with it, that's the core. And it's the core of the fall between Adam and Eve. Now they're naked and ashamed.
Yeah.
It's this, there is no such thing as a non-sexed human.
Okay.
There's no such thing. All of what we are is sexed in that sense.
Well, what would you call someone with a disorder, a genetic anomaly or something?
Okay,
like that?
I'm not going to say there's not exceptions.
So you're not, okay.
Yeah.
But it's
In
an exception
general.
that demonstrates the rule.
And I was just thinking that this element of sexuality, maleness, femaleness, is at the core of everything we are. So I just think you were really right several episodes ago when you were saying this is the core of the culture battle, is the male-female stuff. And I think it's back to Genesis. And I think I'm even thinking about it just philosophically. You can't undo. It's just in everything.
Yeah.
It's in everything. And it's so significant.
I've been working on a slideshow. So I'm in this like missionary support raising phase right now. I sort of put it on pause as Nicole was working through her treatments, and it's time to pick it up again, and trying to think what's the core of my message, both in building a school, but also in trying to influence culture, and what's the actual plan? Because you can't just say, well, if only churches were better, right? I love listening to people complain about why churches aren't any good, but churches are just full of people. And the people need more. And so what is the ministry that we are offering? And what's the plan, the strategy that actually builds it? And so this Trinitarian idea, I'm going to share more maybe next episode, of if you take the Trinity and you understand culture from it, how does it lead you to rebuild, even as in the midst, kind of how the early church did. They were building healthy communities in the midst of depravity and decadence all around them. And as it collapsed, Christianity grew. And that's kind of what it looks like we're headed toward too. So I think we need a plan. So, all right. You have been listening to On Second Thought. Any final thoughts before I wrap it up?
What time are we at?
We're at 1:17.
Let's do it. It's still in the teens.
This will be the shortest episode we've had in a while. All right. This is On Second Thought with Mike and Luke. If you enjoyed this episode or found something to reconsider, share it with a friend and let us know. Start a good conversation. Remember to dig a little deeper and think again. We'll see you next time.